Creating this corked jar is pretty simple once you know the secret to fitting the lid. From Asia to Africa to Europe to the United States, Bill Van Gilder has shared his passion for pottery with thousands of students. His terrific techniques transform functional pieces of pottery into classic works of art.
I'm going to show you how to make a jar to fit a lid. It doesn't shrink like the clay does. Normally, potters work the other way around. We make the lid to fit the jar. You can make them in any size you like, as long as you have different size lids. Now this one is cork, but as long as it has a slight taper to it, this technique works. I'm also going to show you how to use this little profile rib. This will create this rolled foot down at the bottom of the jar. I'm also going to show you how to use your fingertips to create some decoration. So let's get our clay ready.
To make the corked jar, you'll need 3 pounds of clay, a bat, an undercut rib, a profiled rib tool, a cut-off wire, a clean wear board, 2 cork lids, a screw, wax-resist emulsion, and 2 glazes.
This corked jar is basically a simple cylinder. It has an indented neck here, which holds the cork in place. And I'm going to show you how to use the cork as a measuring device to arrive at the size of the opening. And we want this opening to remain as round as we can. So we're going to make it on a bat first.
Bill uses a clay pad to secure the bat to the wheel head, ensuring a strong, stable attachment.
As I pull this cylinder up, I put quite a bit of force on that clay coming upward. And I don't want the bat to come loose. I'm going to create some grooves in the pad. They kind of act as a suction cup to hold this bat in place. Now the centered width of this lump of clay is important. I have a 5-inch cork, and this is basically a cylinder, so the bottom is somewhere around 5 inches too. So I'm going to make the width of this base, before I open it, about 6 inches. Okay, let's pull it up into a cylinder. I'm going to open the floor of the cylinder really flat, about 1/4 of an inch thick.
You can make these jars in many sizes. For more information on throwing a set of graduated size corked jars, check out DIYnetwork.com.
Now let's pull that wall upward. Now normally when I pull a cylinder up, I would tuck my thumb in right here, underneath the wall of the pot. I'm not going to do that this time. I need that extra clay there to create this rolled foot. So just slide your fingertips into the wall itself.
Bill makes several pulls to raise the wall.
And as you start this pull down here, because you don't have that ledge from your thumb tip, you've got to add a little bit of extra pressure from the inside to push the clay towards these outside fingers. I'm also leaving the rim reasonably thick. When we pick up this jar, generally we pick it up by the rim, and I don't want it to be too thin. So let's make another pull. Now at this stage, I start to flare the rim out a little bit. I don't want to get it too wide, so let's collar it in. I've got to keep it under control.
When DIY's throwing clay continues,
at this point, I'm going to take my first measurement. Something I discovered. If you purchase a cork, the top diameter, of course, is bigger than the bottom diameter. And that top diameter is a perfect measuring device for the opening at this wet stage. This clay pot is going to shrink and get smaller. By the time that happens, it fits exactly halfway down the cork. So I'm going to use this top edge as a measuring tool. Now, something else I've invented myself, I guess, holding on with slippery hands to this short little cork and holding it in here is difficult. So I've attached a screw to the bottom of it. It gives me a handle to hold on to. And that's a little bit tight. Edge of this cork is rubbing the inside of my jar, so I'm going to open it up just a little bit by bending it over my outside fingertips. I'm going to make another pull because I know it's still a little thick down here.
Each time Bill adjusts the rim or pulls the wall upwards, he measures the opening again with the cork.
I want just a little bit of play. Not much, but just enough so when I slide this cork into the jar, it doesn't touch the walls. That's pretty good. All right, I'm going to finish this foot. I'm going to use this tool. Now this is a profile tool. You can find these at your local clay suppliers. It's got two indents, one at each side. I'm going to push one of these indents, actually the larger end, into the foot of this pot. First I'm going to wet that whole surface and slide it in. The edge of this pot down here takes on this rounded profile. That's the end of the foot. Now let's put the final form into the jar.
With the long side of an undercutting rib, Bill shapes and smooths the side of the jar.
Now that looks okay, but it's kind of plain. So I'm going to use my fingertips. I'm going to put these throwing lines back in the top half of the jar. It sort of adds a texture, and it's a place where the glazes can pool, and it makes the jar a whole lot more interesting than this plain surface. So let's wet that area.
Bill supports the jar inside while he runs his fingertips over the outside surface to texture it. He measures the opening one last time.
It's a little tight again, so open it up. It's a very light touch at this point. And I'm supporting my inside pressure with these outside fingers so I don't take it too far. One more. That looks pretty good. Take the water out of the inside of my jar and clean up this bottom edge with my sponge. And that's it. It's pretty much a simple cylinder, but it's made a little bit more fancy with some really simple tools. You know what else I like about this? I don't have to make a lid for it. This is perfect.
Coming up on DIY's Throwing Clay, Bill...
My jar is now leather hard. I've got to finish this foot. How are we going to do that? It's really simple. Normally, I would turn it upside down and attach it to the wheel head and use a trimming tool. But if I trim this away, I lose my rolled foot. So I'm going to show you a simpler technique. I'm going to take a clean surfaced piece of board, nice and smooth. This sharp edge right here, it's the only thing I've got to get rid of. So I'm going to roll it. It's gone. It's so simple. Last thing I'm going to do is just push this base in just a little bit. I want this jar to sit on the counter on this edge, not across here. When it's bone dry, we'll put it in the kiln for its first firing.
Now that the jar is bone dry, Bill loads it into the electric kiln for the bisque firing. The kiln will heat up to about 1750 degrees Fahrenheit over 10 to 12 hours. The kiln must cool for at least 24 hours before Bill can unload the bisqueware. Now Bill's ready to glaze the jar.
When it came to picking colors for my jar, I thought about one thing, the cork. I wanted a glaze, a combination of glazes actually, that complement that cork, which means earth tones to me. This nutmeg works well at the bottom. It relates to the natural color of the cork at the top. In between, I'm using this, again, an earth tone glaze, this variegated green. Now where these two cross over, right here, is this really soft transitional color. So these two glazes work well for this project. Okay, I'm going to wax the bottom of the jar to resist the glaze. That's the next step.
Bill uses a soft foam brush and a banding wheel for a neat application.
All right, that looks good. Now, in about 2 minutes, this will be dry enough to dip into the glaze. So while I'm waiting for that to dry, I'm going to stir up my glazes. That looks good and dry. It's not sticky anymore. All right, I'm going to use the variegated green inside and about 2/3 of the way down. You know, when I glaze a cylinder, I never glaze it exactly halfway. It's always a little bit below or a little bit above. Makes for a much more interesting pot visually. So let's get the glaze put on.
Bill pours glaze inside the jar with a ladle. He rotates the jar as he pours out the glaze for an even coating inside. Then he dips the outside.
Now I'm taking my time here. I'm not going to turn it over too quickly. Now I'm waiting for the glaze drip to dry at the rim. If I turn it over too fast, that drip will hit the foot. Then I've got a mess on my hands. I'm going to get the nutmeg glaze mixed up now. Still a little bit tacky, so I'm going to wait about another 30 seconds. If I push my thumb into it now, I'm going to remove the glaze from the outside. All right, we're now ready to do the second dip.
Bill overlaps the glazes about a ½ inch. The last step, remove the excess glaze from the waxed bottom.
All right, let's put it into the kiln. See what these colors do.
Bill loads the raw glazed ware into the electric kiln, making sure no glazed surfaces touch. The kiln will fire to about 2200 degrees Fahrenheit for 10 to 12 hours and melt the glazes to a smooth, glassy finish. When DIY's throwing clay. Welcome back to Throwing Clay. In Baltimore, Maryland, at the National Council on Education for the Ceramic Arts, potters and vendors gather to share their expertise and enthusiasm for working with clay. We spoke with Jim Bailey of Bailey Pottery Equipment to learn more about one of the most basic tools of the trade, the potter's wheel.
The first thing you want to consider is what kind of pots you're going to make, because that's going to determine the amount of clay you need. So now you have to think about what motor is going to be necessary to throw that amount of clay. There is generally two types of motors that are used. One that'll throw up to 50 pounds of clay. That's the motor that's on this wheel. And you can see the piece he's throwing is about 5 pounds of clay. So it's very smooth, it handles the clay, the wheel never slows down. Then you go to 100 pounds, and that's for obviously very large forms that only professionals tend to buy because it takes a lot of skill to throw up to 100 pounds of clay. Well, one of the next important issues really is your posture, because when you're working on a wheel, you have to get your body in a comfortable position. You're going to be working for extended periods of time, and you don't want to be hunched over because that puts a lot of stress on your spine. You have to get the wheel to fit your posture. That means we start at the frame. Now, frames start out where they're quite low. If you take a look at this wheel right over here, that is more or less a starting height. And if you're a shorter person, that might appeal to you because you don't need to lift it off the ground. But the taller you get, then you need to raise the wheel up.
For more information on fitting a potter's wheel to your size and throwing style, check out DIYnetwork.com.
So some people actually stand up when they throw because they have back issues. So this wheel is designed for a stand-up position. You see there are adjusting points on the wheel, and actually you can raise it up even further depending upon your height and, again, what is comfortable for you. The frame is cross-braced to give integrity to the base of the wheel, because when you throw, you push into it, you lean your body into it, and you want to make sure that the wheel doesn't move. If it wobbled, then it would affect the pot that you're throwing. So good stability in the frame, an important issue. Well, the next consideration is the kind of splash pan you want on your wheel. Now, Eric is working on a unibody pan. So he can draw his knees into the wheel because the wheel is very solid and it gives him stability, which makes throwing easier. It becomes an extension of his body. When you throw, you want to use something to brace on, that you're concentrating a lot of energy on the clay. And of course, the other thing is throwing is a very messy process. So you can see this wheel has a very large area away from Eric, and he's got tools in there, he's got sponge and slop and trimmings. This area can be utilized and grabbed, and it's easily cleaned. The other kind of wheel has a two-piece removable splash pan. This type of two-piece splash pan doesn't offer the same stability if you're going to lean into it because it is a removable part, but still this is a very commonly used approach, and it does have the advantage that if you are going to throw a very large form like a wide platter or a bowl, you can remove this completely and have no pan in place, in which case you're just throwing directly on a bat. The downside of that, of course, is water is going to be on that clay and it's going to throw outward, so you are going to have more cleanup in the general studio. But that's the trade-off. One other consideration is, of course, the pedal, because the pedal is what you adjust to change the rotation and the speed of the wheel. And when you are going to have your foot resting on a pedal for the better part of a day or however long you intend to throw, you want to think about the comfort of that pedal. Some pedals have angles that are rather steep and they require more motion to go from the lowest point to the highest point. The last component, which is how you're going to lay out your work area. We have a variety of counter systems that lock into the frame. As you can see here, Eric has all his pieces on a wear board, which he can just pick up and remove and take to a storage area. But with these extension wings on either side, it's right within his grasp. So as he arcs his hand across this counter, all his tools can be lined up for easy accessibility. And of course, another important issue is it keeps it out of the work area, which has a lot of slop in it. Some people don't have a lot of space in their studio and every inch counts. So here's another option for people. This is a piece of plywood. Measures basically 32 by 12. It relates to a rack system, and you can pick up your pots. So that's another practical option if you want to be able to store your pieces immediately and not have to do extra transfer work. And when you're starting out with a wheel, you may not want to invest a lot of money. So typically in the field, price range may be somewhere between $400 and $500 for a basic wheel. What's going to vary here is how much clay you can center.
The cost of a wheel depends largely on the size of the motor. A wheel like this one costs $700 to $900, and one with a large motor, a shelving system, and other accessories can run up to $1,200.
I always feel that you want to give yourself some room for future growth, so don't limit yourself.
Whether you're buying your first wheel or upgrading to keep pace with your skills, one thing is sure: the time you spend on your wheel is reflected in the quality of your pots. Bill's thrown over 300 tons of clay. The ease with which he works at the wheel and the beauty of his finished pieces mirror his investment of time and energy.
You can store almost anything in these jars. And I really like using cork as a lid material. It's soft and pliable, so it seals easily and keeps things really fresh. I'm Bill Van Gilder. Have a good time in the studio.